Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day two of Who Feeds Bengaluru at Phytopia. Who Feeds Bangalore is an exploration into different forces that shape how the city of Bengaluru eats. It's a participatory research project fueled by strong doses of curiosity and collective community thinking and doing to get a clearer idea of the people who feed Bengaluru. At Phytopia, we will dive into Bengaluru, exploring the relationships that the city has with plants through a 2-day workshop that includes conversations and a little bit of cooking and creating. Thank you for joining us today. This session is in collaboration with the Bangalore Sustainability Forum, an interinstitutional collaborative initiative that aims to address issues relating to long-term sustainability of urban and peri-urban landscapes. Some general housekeeping rules before we get started. Please do keep your microphone and video turned off. You can ask your questions in the chat, and the mediator of the session, which is me, will ask your questions to the speaker at the time allocated. This session is being recorded and is also being streamed live to YouTube. Please do participate in the poll that you will find at the bottom of your screen. And there is also a feedback form in the chat. We would love your feedback. We had a really interesting day yesterday listening to different perspectives of food from the Bengaluru food system, from seed keepers to farmers, scientists, and permaculturists. If you did miss the talks, you can find them in the Bangalore Sustainability Forum's YouTube channel, and we will drop that link in the chat as well. Food is an intimate part of our lives. Some of us grow it, some of us love making it, all of us enjoy eating it, and for some of us, what we eat and where our food comes from is a very strong part of our identity. Over the next hour and a half, you will hear about where Bengaluru's food comes from, who grows what, and how this has changed over the decades. You will hear about the multiple benefits of urban agriculture, from personal satisfaction to broader outcomes for a more sustainable and resilient city. And finally, we have an interactive discussion with 4 urban farming practitioners and initiatives, and you will get a glimpse into the practices and challenges of growing food in the city. First up, we have Sheetal Patil, a researcher at Azim Premji University, Bangalore. Her contribution to an interdisciplinary empirical research has been in the areas of sustainability of smallholder agriculture in rural as well as peri-urban areas, with a specific focus on the interlinkages between agroecology and social well-being. Today, Sheetal will talk to us about agro-cultural ecologies that shape the food system of and around Bengaluru. Over to you, Sheetal.
Thanks a lot, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth said, I'm Sheetal Patil. I'm a researcher at School of Development of Azim Premji University. First, I would like to thank Science Gallery Bengaluru, Bangalore Sustainability Forum, and the project Who Feeds Bengaluru for giving us this opportunity to be part of Phytopia and share our some of part of our research around Bengaluru and its agriculture and food system, and how it intersects with sustainability and resilience. As Elizabeth said, the entire session is focused geographically, at least on Bengaluru and its links with food. So let me just start sharing my screen. I have a set of slides prepared for this, and then let's get started. We have titled this presentation as Agro-Cultural Ecologies that shape food systems of and around Bengaluru. When we say links between the city and the food, what we really mean is that links between the producer and consumers, the links between producers with their land, water, animals, the entire ecosystem that they are part of, the links between consumers and the efforts that they take to grow their food in whatever small way they do. So let me start with understanding the agriculture ecology social, cultural practices, etc. And for doing that, we ought to go a little bit into the history of the place itself. Therefore, let's look at Bengaluru's history just in geographic, demographic, and topographic sense. I know that most of you must have seen these visuals many number of times, but to link agroecology to food systems, it is important to understand the trajectory of the place and the transformation that has crafted or shaped people's food plates in the city. Although it is true that today we no more have to worry about or think about that probably we will not get mangoes in winter to eat, thanks to globalization, but it has never become like this kind of a situation overnight or over some years. It has taken longer than many centuries, probably. So therefore, look at what Bengaluru was in the years when it was established. There are stories around how Bengaluru got its name, although we don't know if it is fictional, but we got to believe it. But only message that I would like to emphasize here from that story is that city has got its name from the food that was served to then the ruler, Bendakalu. Bendakalu Uru is something like that. We know the story of the city has got from the story that the ruler was served by the boiled beans. I don't know any other city, or maybe I'm mistaken that any other city in India getting named from the food items that such a food item that we see in Bangalore's case. So it's safe to say that Bangalore has its identity that was shaped by the food itself. So in those years, we see that in these maps that Bangalore had a port, and around it there was lots of agricultural land from where lots of millet, cereals, pulses, those kind of food items used to come and feed people in the city. Apart from having most favorable climate and perfect conditions for growing whole lot of these kind of food items, Bengaluru had also a buzzing marketplaces that traded food and other agricultural produces. Therefore, even today, we have Balepete, Akipete, Ragipete, Siglarapete, Ganigarapete, Aralepete, and so on. So these are the marketplaces which were active nodes in agricultural food supply chain during even that time of the city. So if we go and move forward and see the city in past some decades, that we see that later on, Pete and the new town, such as we know now as a cantonment area, was distinctively differently established. When I emphasize here to say that distinctively, that has reasons because the plants, the trees, and the different kinds of species that were grown there in cantonment area were very different from what was there in the Pete area. There were lots of introduced species of vegetables, flowers, ornamental plants, and there are also witnesses that people grew lots of berries and exotic vegetables even then in the city. In the map here of the city over the past century is another peculiar thing and the feature that we see number of water bodies. Most of these water bodies were man-made and used to supply water for agriculture. The intricate design of the cascading nature of these lakes very efficiently maintained the water levels in various and many lakes spread across the city. Not only water needs for the agriculture, but it also supported biodiversity and lots of hosts of other ecosystem services that the city was enjoying during that time. So with this kind of a conducive and very good living conditions, many people made Bengaluru their home. So let's see how the trend of number of people occupying the city looked like over the past century. So from 1901 to as recent as last year, with much less than a million population in 1901, we are over 12 million now. Then all these people need houses to live. Thus the city boundary got constantly expanded and reshaped. How it has happened from 28 square kilometers in around 1901. So we were looking at over the past century how Bangalore has grown from 28 square kilometer to whooping now as 741 square kilometer. till the past last year. So for 12 to 15 times increase in population, the city has grown almost 26 times in spatial extent. From where would have all this land come from? Obviously, it is from the peripheries of the city. Bengaluru being landlocked city, it is believed that it has less scope for its spatial growth. It has more scope for its spatial growth, but luckily, on the two sides, uh, that is east and southeast of the city and south of the city, we hit the boundary of other states. So there is some sort of a restrictions in the growth, at least administratively for the city. But if we look at some of the maps over the past 2 decades, we see that the city has grown. Um, these are the four set of maps showing the growth of the city in past 2 decades. We just need to make note of the change of color in pixel from these light green spots to the red spots, which literally means that the place has lost its vegetation cover and has been converted into built up of some other form, which is either buildings, roads, industries, any kind of a structure as you imagine. If the city has spatially grown in its extent, it is not only in two dimensions like length and breadth, but also it is in terms of elevation, right? When we start building something like a road or rail link or multi-story buildings, we have to make the land flatten as flat as possible. So it gets topographically also altitudinally also modified. Although we see that there are ups and downs in the road when we travel through the city, but on the large scale or even at the micro scale, we can see that a lot of the water flows have been affected because of the flattening of the land in the city. That is the reason maybe city experiences monsoon flooding in some parts. It's not just the flow of water from higher altitude to the lower altitude gets affected, but also it impacts the soil formation and the flow of other ecosystem services from one place to another. So while we are looking at all these things, the changes have taken place. We know that we have witnessed that in living in the city. But what we try to emphasize here is these changes are not only in biophysical terms, but they have transformed the food system and therefore our food plate. So here we have these kind of a looping cycle where changes in peri-urban and urban spaces giving or making a lot of influence on the food system and ultimately on our food plate. So in these three boxes of this loop, we'll try to just go in one by one, looking at first urban and peri-urban spaces, how they get modified. The changes are in agroecological and socio-cultural parameters in terms of production, in terms of ecology, in terms of social, and in terms of cultural. So here are the things that I have listed, and these have gone through a lot of changes over the past decades, and also dynamically influencing one another at the same time. Moving forward in that loop, we go to food systems and the six main elements of food system that we have here, namely production, processing, transport, access, consumption, and how we recover the resources and waste. So if we have changes, experience changes in the landscape and the larger extent of the city and the biophysical parameters of it, it also has made shifts in our food system and its elements. Uh, and ultimately, we come back to food plates, which are not only the food that we eat represented in our food plates, but it's actually the embodiment of diversity, nutrition, equity, trust, food that actually nurtures and heals us, how safe it is, how traceable it is, how balanced it is. So all these things are represented in on our food plate. Um, so if we know that these are the things which the city has experienced, uh, and how and why these changes have taken place. Here is our recently concluded study where we try to explore the connection between the city and the farms in the periphery. So this is how we see the exchanges happening. Not only food produce, but also labor, land, water that flows from the periphery to the city. When we say land and water flows from the periphery, it is not exactly the land going, but city coming into its periphery. And in return, what periphery gets is little investment and lots of effluence, as we know. So since these are the flow of produce, capital, people back and forth from periphery and the core, it is certain that not only ecology but also culture gets transformed. And how do we see that? It is in a current scenario, it is something like we have gone from subsistence oriented agriculture to more commercialized, more based on the commerce, and from locally and regionally integrated to globally linked. In short, we have to say that we have transformed from socio-ecological civilization to fossil fuel based economy, which has meant that there are lots of alterations in multifunctionality, diversity, and resilience of the agro-ecosystem and the farm households as well. What are some of the examples of these? So these are the examples where we see currently as our agro-cultural ecologies have been looking like, large tracts of land getting cultivated for lawn grass, for cut flowers or open flowers, eucalyptus plantation, and recently we have also seen wastewater irrigated farms. It's not that the food crops are not being grown in the periphery, but the crops have shifted, like the vegetables that we used to have locally and indigenous varieties have now been shifted to exotic ones, and so on. So if we know these transformations have happened, still there are some kind of hopes that we look here as possibilities that we can have agroecologically oriented urban food systems. At least in our imaginations, we can conceptualize that the food system that is agroecologically benign would look like this, and how this matrix shows is that on the left we have the column of agroecological principles, and in the right side we have columns which represents the elements of food systems. And we see that there are potentials in various elements of food systems to integrate agroecological principles. And it's not only in our imaginations. I was very happy to see that yesterday from people who talked in Who Feeds Bengaluru's this workshop about seed keeping, farmers, alternate practices in farming, food scientists, aggregators, chefs, foragers, consumers, all have been contributing in their own innovative ways to bring back agroecology in our food system. So luckily we have lots of initiatives sprouting, and we had initially thought that Chandni will take over from here to introduce the project, but she has already done that, and we have examples after this to talk about and know their experiences from their own mouth. And I hope that Pratigna will now get on to the session and introduce us to the panels who have been practicing in the city in some form of farming initiatives, be it is in a balcony, be it in a terraces, their home gardens, empty plots, the community farming, alternate practices, and many other allied kind of activities, such as how Chandni explained about solid waste management, water harvesting, and recycling, and those kind of initiatives.
I am curious to understand, during these last couple of months, from both of you, Sheetal and Chandni, what have the during this time of COVID, we at least have seen a real change in the kind of conversations we've been having around growing food. People are more interested. A lot of people want to participate in this activity. How have you observed this change in the last couple of months because of the pandemic, because of people on lockdown, because of a shock to the food supply chains, and how do you see that continuing post in a post-pandemic world?
It is as Professor or Dr. Rao was talking yesterday about how we have the culinary heritage of different indigenous varieties of seeds and indigenous varieties of vegetables and fruits that the city was growing and consuming. So I think there was already already a lot of interest in growing our own food, at least in Bengaluru and its peripheries. And COVID-19, no doubt, has given people more opportunities to look into different kinds of alternatives. If not this, why not we try this? And if we have not tried this till now, let us do that now because we have lots of resources and time at our end. So this has happened during the lockdown, but also there are many things which have happened, such as connection between the producer and consumers. So people have directly been in touch with farmers, knowing their skills, acknowledging their practices, acknowledging the produce that they get and the difficulties and challenges that they face while growing. So that kind of shift in kind of behavior has happened, and which will, I think, go for a long time in the minds of us like a city dwellers. And I think the moment is here, and it's going to stay for long.
So Ambili, sorry, has a question. Have you looked at the nutritional profile of growing food and also the impact of using wastewater for agriculture, like spinach or such greens that we get from, are they from wastewater cultivation?
See, I think it's not that all the greens which we get in the city are grown using wastewater. There are lots of patches in and around Bangalore which grow vegetables with even fresh water, which is like either tank or even the groundwater. So, although we have not looked at the residues, uh, uh, I think you mean by nutrition is maybe residues of a different kind of a chemical that comes as from the wastewater. Although we have not looked at it, many other research institutes in Bangalore have looked at it and seen that there are traces from in vegetables which come from certain areas of the city which has the sewage water irrigation for farming. But we can't really generalize this finding that every green which is coming in the city is pesticide laden or having contamination of chemicals.
We have a question from Anay Anand who asks any do-it-yourself food safety testing manual or reference available for the public that you know of.
I think as I know that University of Agricultural Sciences (UIS) in Bangalore has a good nutrition department, which does a lot of awareness and workshop around the city and also in other parts of Karnataka, showing people about how we can have the balanced and nutritionally rich diet. But the safety testing kit kind of a DIY kind of manual. They are available online, and which could be things that you need to test using some of the chemical reactions that food will have.
Thank you. Anusha asked how much of what we grow as consumers is enough to feed us?
We have lots of examples in and around city, people talking about how they whatever they grow is at least enough for the family of four for half of the month. And this is the scale of say either terrace or their home gardens, which is in the back and front of their houses. So with that, we can do the math and see that how much of food we can grow for our own families and have it for at least half of the month.
There was something that when we were speaking about before was what is the relationship or how does our eating in the city influence those actually growing food in and around the city, and how does that change their lives or their what is the could you tell us a little bit more about the relationships between that, about um, how our food that we want or we eat in the city kind of influences those actually growing the food?
I think there is a lot of back and forth kind of exchange happening, because as we saw in the loop where change in landscape changes the food system and changes the food plates that we have, but also there is the change can start anywhere in that cycle. The change can start in food plate itself, so which is like the demand from the consumer, right? So if the consumer demands something and the signal is immediately transferred to the farmers in the peripheries, at least very quickly, and they usually do these changes in their landscape to grow what is demanded in the city uh, very instantly. So uh, it's a kind of cycle, and it can start from anywhere, either in the change in landscape or in change in food. So either at the producer's end or at the consumer's end, and the loop goes on.
We have one question from Raghavendra who says, how can you identify vegetables grown with wastewater?
I don't know how to do it, because it's, you might think that by smell or by sight that it is grown on wastewater, but it may not be true. It may be just because the breed of the vegetable or the seed of the vegetable is of that kind of a nature, so you feel that it is grown. Or sometimes even farmers, when they wash vegetables after harvest, use water from different sources, and that might also give you a wrong signal that it has grown in wastewater. So absolutely no precise answer to that.
I have another question regarding, because also in the couple of months we've seen the dynamic of with we were talking to the Urban Design Collective the other day, and they had done a project around Chennai, and they were saying that most of the produce that comes from outside the city or far away, at least 70% of it is used for commercial organizations, so like for restaurants or drinks for and for more commercial catering. But whereas it is possible to grow the 30% of the produce within the city to feed the immediate city itself. Do you think, as like, so is this applicable to Bangalore as a city as well? If you would look at the percentage of food kind of coming in for commercial caterings or for our self home use, and with the change in the dynamic of like lesser people going out to restaurants and more home cooks, kind of like, there's a big dynamic shift in how people are cooking and serving food commercially, lesser weddings, lesser occasions to celebrate outside. Do you think that the city can like sufficiently feed itself, say in, I don't know, 30 years from now, if we were to grow within our city?
I am hopeful, and I feel that there's a lot of scope, and of course it is challenging and it takes a lot of effort. But collectively, if we work together, right from seed conservation and seed saving to our waste recovery and nutrient recovery, I think it's possible to do.
Thank you very much, Sheetal. So, one of the last questions before we move on to Pratigna I have is, have you noticed within the city any interesting, because of we've been looking at Bangalore in different, through different lenses of food, and one of them is cultures and identity, and we're trying to map out, like, it's an amazing and vibrant city of very different people, from very different places, who kind of, and this diversity, and it's incredible to see through food and through a plate of food, which we're hopefully going to do in the next session, where we'll cook with different people and kind of explore their relationships with the city and plants and seasonality. I'm curious to know if you have also seen, in terms of growing within people in different localities, growing specific food in specific places that represent those cultural identities.
Of course, we see. I think there are pockets of the city which were developed earlier, places like JP Nagar, Jayanagar, Malleshwaram. You will see a lot of mixed kind of landscape there. They have large fruit trees as along. Also, they have smaller patches of vegetables and tubers that they grow. You will see pockets of areas which have developed later on towards the east and southeast of the city. You will see a lot of people growing in the balconies and terraces, which restricts them to growing certain kind of vegetables and fruits. But it's nice to see that people growing mangoes and sapota and lots of other uh, fruit and vegetables which need a large space also on terraces. So though there is a kind of segregation or there is a kind of a pattern that we see, I think people learn very quickly from each other and try to at least experiment and see whether they can get something out of whatever space they have at their end.
Thank you very much, Sheetal, for this session and just understanding the foodscape of Bangalore through these agricultural ecologies and urban agriculture. And we're really looking forward to learning more about your project as well as we go along.